Don't try this with the King's Guard, seriously. For him, every trip was an opportunity to do something memorable, something that would make people pause, laugh, or sometimes even gasp. That's why, when he booked his ticket to London, he knew he wanted more than just to see the famous sights. He wanted to experience them in a way that felt alive. He wanted to capture moments that would make his friends, and everyone who followed his social media, stop scrolling and pay attention. London, with its mixture of old-world charm and modern energy, was exactly the kind of city Jake thrived in. Cobblestone streets twisted through neighborhoods lined with coffee shops, bookstores, and little markets that smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee. Big red buses and black cabs rushed past, their drivers honking occasionally, while the River Thames flowed calmly beneath bridges that had stood for centuries. For Jake, every corner was a new stage, every street a chance to discover something remarkable. By the third day of his trip, Jake found himself standing in front of Buckingham Palace. He had read about the King's Guard, with their tall, black hats and red uniforms, and how they stood perfectly still, watching over the palace grounds. Tourists were everywhere, snapping photos, waving, and sometimes trying to make the guards react, though most people knew it was pointless. The guards never moved, never spoke, never blinked, at least that's how they appeared. For Jake, that stoicism was both intimidating and fascinating. He had spent the morning wandering around St. James's Park, the sun glinting off the pond, ducks waddling by, and families enjoying picnics. He had even stopped to feed a few squirrels, laughing as one daring little creature nibbled from his hand. But as he rounded the corner and the palace came into view, he felt a surge of excitement. The palace gates loomed high, the flags fluttering gently in the breeze, and the guards stood like statues, straight and unyielding. For Jake, it was the perfect place for a daring photo, the kind that would get attention online. He walked closer, camera in hand, feeling the buzz of the crowd around him. Tourists from all over the world clicked their phones, asked for selfies, and whispered to each other in dozens of languages. Jake's heart beat faster as he sized up the guards. They were so still, so serious, that he couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and challenge. Part of him wanted to respect them, to quietly take a photo from a distance. But another part, the part that loved risk and attention, whispered that this was the perfect moment for something bold. Jake glanced around at his friends, who had come along for the trip. They were chatting and laughing, trying to blend into the crowd. "Do you really think you should do it?" one of them asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Jake waved him off with a grin. "Relax, it'll be fine, it's just a photo. No one's getting hurt." He adjusted his camera strap and took a few practice shots of the palace, framing the guards perfectly in the background. He had thought about it all night before, how he could get a unique photo without being disrespectful. But now, standing in front of the real guards, he felt a surge of nervous energy. The guards' faces were expressionless, eyes staring straight ahead, as if they could see right through him. Jake remembered reading that they were trained to ignore distractions, to remain focused no matter what happened around them. That made him even more determined. He wanted to be the person who could make them react, even in the smallest way. He started walking slowly closer, pretending to admire the architecture of the palace. He crouched slightly, adjusted his camera lens, and inched forward. Every step felt calculated yet thrilling. He could feel the eyes of other tourists on him, some amused, some worried. Some of the tourists whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly at him. He could hear snippets of their conversations. "That's brave," one said. "Or crazy," another whispered. The closer he got, the more he noticed the details of the guards' uniforms. The red coats were immaculate, buttons polished until they gleamed in the sunlight. Their hats, tall and black, cast shadows over their eyes, giving them an almost statuesque appearance. He could see the faint outline of a rifle against one guard's chest, and he imagined the discipline it took to stand there for hours without moving. Jake was impressed, truly impressed, and that made him even bolder. He wanted a photo that captured the contrast between his playful energy and their unyielding seriousness. Jake paused for a moment to take a deep breath. He glanced back at his friends, who were now watching him closely. "Are you sure about this?" one of them asked again. Jake smiled confidently, though inside he felt a flicker of doubt. "Trust me," he said. "It'll be fine." He crouched slightly, holding his camera at just the right angle, planning the jump that would make it look like he was floating in front of the guard. In his mind, it was going to be the perfect shot, one that would go viral, make people laugh, and show off his daring spirit. He counted silently to 3. 1, 2, 3, and then he jumped. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. His camera clicked at exactly the right moment, capturing him midair, arms flailing slightly, with the guard frozen behind him. He imagined how hilarious it would look online. The serious guard, the carefree tourist, the perfect contrast. But that moment of excitement vanished instantly when he realized he wasn't alone. A firm voice broke through the air. "Sir, step back, please." Jake froze mid-jump, landing awkwardly on the pavement. He turned slowly, and behind him another guard had appeared, standing silently, almost magically, as if he had been there all along. His posture was perfect, his eyes steady, and there was no hint of humor or amusement. The crowd around them went quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Jake's heart pounded. He had thought this would be funny, but now he realized how serious the guards were. He tried to smile to make a joke. "Just a little photo stunt," he said, hoping it would ease the tension. But the guard remained silent, his expression unwavering. Another officer appeared, motioning politely but firmly for Jake to step away from the gates. Jake felt his face heat up, a mix of embarrassment and fear. The crowd murmured quietly, and his friends rushed over, trying to pull him back before things got worse. As he stepped away, Jake's mind raced. He had wanted adventure, he had wanted a story to tell, but now he understood something important. Some boundaries were not meant to be crossed. The King's Guard was not just a tourist attraction. They represented centuries of tradition, discipline, and respect. In his desire for a perfect photo, he had almost forgotten that. He realized that sometimes trying to be clever or daring could backfire, and that even small actions could have serious consequences. Sitting on a nearby bench, Jake caught his breath. He looked at the palace gates from a distance, the guards still standing tall, unflinching. He felt a mix of awe and humility. For the first time that day, he truly understood what it meant to respect a place and its people. Around him, tourists continued to snap photos and laugh, but Jake knew he would never forget the lesson he had learned in those few seconds. By the time the sun began to dip behind the palace, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake was ready to move on. He still had more of London to explore, more streets to wander, and more stories to discover. But the image of the guards, so serious, so unyielding, stayed with him. It was a reminder that some experiences were more valuable when approached with respect rather than recklessness. And deep down, he knew that the story he would tell later, about the jump that almost went wrong, would be far more meaningful than any viral photo ever could be. After the near incident at Buckingham Palace, Jake and his friends decided to step away from the crowds and find a quieter spot to sit and talk. The excitement of the morning had left Jake with a racing heart and a mind full of thoughts. He replayed the moment over and over in his head, the jump, the click of the camera, and then the sudden presence of the officer who had appeared as if out of nowhere. What had felt thrilling just seconds ago now seemed foolish and reckless. Jake's friend Sam, who had been the most cautious of the group, nudged him lightly. "You really could have gotten in serious trouble, you know," he said quietly. "The guards don't joke around and the officers take their job seriously. You were lucky this time." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. He knew Sam was right. He had been lucky, very lucky, and he could feel the embarrassment creeping up his neck, warming his face like fire. But more than embarrassment, he felt a twinge of guilt. He hadn't just risked himself. He had risked making a scene in front of a large crowd, drawing attention that could have caused problems for others. The group walked down a side street lined with small cafes and shops. Jake's camera hung around his neck, heavier now with the weight of reality. He had always loved photographing people, places, and the little details of life that others often overlooked, but today he realized there were limits to what should be captured. Some moments, he thought, were better appreciated in memory rather than frozen in an image. As they passed a quaint coffee shop, Jake suggested they take a break. They found a small table outside under the shade of a tree and ordered drinks. The warm aroma of coffee and baked pastries filled the air, and for a moment, Jake tried to relax. He sipped slowly, letting the heat of the cup soothe his nerves. He glanced at his friends, noticing how they were chatting quietly, their voices low and calm. He realized that for the first time that day, he didn't feel the need to entertain or impress anyone. He could just sit, breathe, and think. "I guess I got carried away," Jake said finally, breaking the silence. I just wanted something exciting, something to make people notice. But I forgot to think about the rules or the respect part. I wasn't thinking clearly. His words were honest, and for once he didn't try to make them sound funny or clever. Sam gave him a small, understanding smile. It happens, Sam said, but now you know. Some traditions and rules are serious for a reason. Those guards have been trained for years to stand perfectly still and stay focused. They've practiced patience and discipline you can't imagine. Jake nodded, looking back toward the palace in the distance. Even from this side street, the red of the guards' uniforms and the black of their tall hats stood out against the golden walls of the palace. They were like living statues, and Jake realized that their silence was not empty, it was full of purpose. After finishing their drinks, Jake's group decided to continue exploring, but Jake felt a shift in himself. Before, he had been chasing attention, thinking that adventure was about daring stunts and bold photos. Now he wanted something deeper, something that truly connected him to the city he was visiting. They wandered through narrow streets, discovering hidden alleyways filled with murals, small markets selling colorful fabrics, and musicians playing gentle tunes on the sidewalks. Jake began to photograph these scenes, but this time, he did it differently. He focused on capturing the life and energy of the city without putting anyone at risk or causing a disturbance. As the day went on, Jake noticed other tourists still crowding around Buckingham Palace. Some were taking selfies, others were trying to get the perfect shot of the guards. A few even laughed quietly, trying little antics to get the guards' attention. Watching them, Jake felt a mix of amusement and concern. He recognized the same impulse that had driven him earlier, and he silently hoped that none of them would repeat his mistake. He knew now that the guards were not just part of a photo opportunity. They represented a long tradition of service, discipline, and respect. Later in the afternoon, Jake and his friends arrived at Trafalgar Square, where the energy of London felt entirely different. Street performers juggled and danced, tourists fed pigeons, and the sound of laughter and music filled the air. Jake felt his mood lift, enjoying the lighter side of the city. Yet, even in this bustling place, the memory of the palace lingered. He thought about how close he had come to trouble, how quickly fun could turn into a serious situation if someone didn't understand the rules. Sitting on the steps of the square's fountain, Jake reflected on his experience. He realized that travel was not just about capturing amazing photos or seeking thrills. It was about understanding the culture, the history, and the people. He thought about the guards and the countless visitors who came to the palace every day. They were part of a story larger than any one person, a story that had lasted for centuries. Jake felt humbled by the realization that he had been a small, reckless piece of that story, and he needed to be more mindful in the future. As the sun began to set, casting warm light across the city, Jake's phone buzzed. It was a notification from his social media account. Curious, he checked it and found that his earlier stunt at Buckingham Palace had already been noticed online. People were laughing, some were criticizing, and a few were sharing similar stories. Jake stared at the screen, feeling a mix of embarrassment and amazement. He knew that the post could have gone viral, but he also knew that the story was now a lesson, a reminder that some moments demanded respect and caution more than attention. His friends gathered around, laughing at the situation. "Well, at least people are entertained," one of them said, teasing lightly. Jake smiled, but he felt a deeper sense of responsibility. Entertainment, he realized, wasn't worth putting oneself or anyone else in danger. There was value in caution, in understanding the rules, and in appreciating traditions without trying to bend them. That evening, as the group returned to their hotel, Jake continued to think about the day. He made a mental note to share his experience honestly with his followers, not to make fun of the guards or glorify his stunt, but to highlight the lesson he had learned. He wanted people to enjoy the fun side of travel, but he also wanted them to respect the places and people they encountered. It was a balance he had never truly considered before, but now he understood its importance. Before going to bed, Jake looked out the hotel window at the city lights twinkling below. London felt alive, vibrant, and full of stories waiting to be discovered. But he also felt a quiet respect for the history that shaped it, for the people who served as guardians of tradition, and for the moments that demanded humility. Jake realized that true adventure wasn't just about daring stunts or perfect photos. It was about learning, growing, and appreciating the world in its fullness. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake promised himself that he would carry this lesson forward. Tomorrow, he would continue exploring London, but he would do so with more awareness, more patience, and more respect. He knew the city had many more stories to tell, and he wanted to experience them in a way that was meaningful and safe. The incident at Buckingham Palace would stay with him, not as a source of shame, but as a guide, a reminder that courage and curiosity are important, but so are respect and wisdom. And as the night settled over London, Jake felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced that morning. The city was still full of energy, still alive with adventure, but he understood now that some adventures required patience, observation, and thoughtfulness. The King's Guard, standing silently in the distance, had taught him that lesson without saying a single word. And that, Jake realized, was perhaps the most powerful lesson of all. The next morning, Jake woke up early, the memory of Buckingham Palace still fresh in his mind. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the streets of London. Unlike the previous day, when excitement and impulsiveness had driven him, today he felt a quiet sense of purpose. He wanted to explore the city with respect, curiosity, and mindfulness. Yet he couldn't deny a small thrill in knowing that, despite his careful approach now, the city still held surprises. After a light breakfast at the hotel, Jake and his friends decided to walk toward Westminster. The streets were just starting to fill with the usual bustle, commuters heading to work, delivery bikes weaving through traffic, and tourists like them eager to take in the sights. Jake carried his camera, but this time it felt different around his neck. It was no longer a tool to chase daring stunts or impress people online. Instead, it was a way to notice the beauty and details he might otherwise miss. The patterns on an old door, the play of light across the river, or the expressions of people in quiet moments. As they approached the area around Westminster Abbey, Jake noticed a group of tourists clustered near the entrance, listening intently to a guide. The guide's voice was calm but lively, filled with facts about the Abbey's history, its architecture, and the famous figures buried there. Jake paused, taking in the details, and realized that for all his adventures, he had often rushed past places without fully appreciating them. Today, he wanted to slow down, to truly understand the stories behind the landmarks. While his friends chatted and took casual photos, Jake wandered closer to the front of the Abbey. The stone walls were tall and intricately carved, every detail speaking of centuries of craftsmanship. He noticed the stained glass windows catching the morning sun, casting colorful patterns on the ground. It was a quiet moment, but one that filled him with awe. He thought about the history, the people who had walked these streets before him, and the countless stories that had unfolded here. It was humbling. As he stood there, lost in thought, Jake noticed a small group of children playing nearby. They were laughing and chasing one another, their carefree joy echoing across the courtyard. It reminded him of the morning at Buckingham Palace, the crowd, the excitement, the impulsiveness. But these children were naturally playful, not seeking attention or approval. They were enjoying the moment simply because it existed. Jake smiled, feeling a lesson gently settle in his heart. Joy and excitement didn't have to come from reckless stunts. Sometimes, the simplest moments could be the most meaningful. Later, as he rejoined his friends, Jake suggested they take a boat ride along the Thames. The idea was simple, relaxing, and safe, but it also promised new perspectives of the city. They purchased tickets and boarded a modest sightseeing boat. As the vessel moved slowly along the river, Jake watched London glide past him. The London Eye spinning gently in the distance, the historic bridges stretching across the water, and the mix of old and modern buildings lining the riverbank. It was peaceful, yet alive with energy, and Jake felt a profound sense of connection to the city. While the boat carried them along the Thames, Jake thought about the events of the previous day and how different today felt. Instead of trying to prove something, he was simply experiencing life as it happened. The guards at Buckingham Palace, standing silently in their positions, had unknowingly taught him the value of patience, observation, and respect. He realized that adventure wasn't just about bold actions or shocking photos. It could also be found in quiet moments of awareness, in observing the world and appreciating its subtleties. After the boat ride, Jake and his friends walked toward the South Bank, where street performers and artists brought energy and creativity to the riverside. Jugglers tossed pins with precision, musicians played gentle melodies, and painters captured cityscapes with brushes and colors. Jake paused frequently, taking photographs, but this time he focused on capturing the human stories around him. The joy of a child learning to juggle, the concentration of a painter creating their work, the laughter shared between strangers watching a performance. He felt a deeper satisfaction than any daring stunt could provide. While walking along the crowded riverside, Jake noticed a group of guards patrolling nearby. These were not the King's Guard from Buckingham Palace, but local security officers ensuring the safety of the busy area. Seeing them, Jake felt a familiar twinge of nervousness, a memory of his impulsive behavior the day before. But instead of feeling fear or tension, he felt respect. He understood that these officers were performing a serious role, just like the guards, and that their discipline and attention were part of maintaining order in the city. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Jake's friends suggested stopping for lunch at a small riverside cafe. They found a table outside, enjoying the warmth and the gentle breeze. Over sandwiches and fresh juice, they talked about the morning's experiences. Jake shared his reflections, explaining how the events at Buckingham Palace had changed his perspective. His friends listened, some nodding knowingly, others laughing lightly at his previous impulsiveness, but all appreciating the honesty in his words. After lunch, they continued exploring, heading toward Covent Garden. The streets were filled with performers, artists, and bustling markets. Jake noticed a mime performing near a fountain, his movements precise and expressive. Children gathered around, their laughter blending with the mime's exaggerated gestures. Jake watched, fascinated by the art of performance that didn't rely on risk or danger, but on skill, patience, and creativity. It reminded him that attention and admiration could be earned through talent and thoughtfulness, not recklessness. While wandering through the market, Jake noticed a stall selling handcrafted journals. Curious, he approached and picked one up. The cover was simple but elegant, with a leather finish and blank pages inside. He realized he had been so focused on capturing external moments through photography that he had neglected capturing his own thoughts and reflections. He purchased the journal, deciding it would be a place to record his travel experiences honestly, without exaggeration or spectacle. He thought about the story of Buckingham Palace and how he could write it down, not as a boast, but as a meaningful lesson about respect, awareness, and learning from mistakes. As the afternoon faded into evening, Jake's group decided to watch the sunset from a quiet riverside spot. The sky shifted from blue to shades of orange, pink, and purple. The city lights began to twinkle, reflecting in the Thames like scattered stars. Jake felt a profound sense of peace. He thought about the past day and how different things could have gone if the officers at Buckingham Palace had reacted harshly. He realized how fortunate he had been and how much he had learned in such a short time. Sitting on the riverside wall, Jake reflected on how much his perspective had changed. He had come to London seeking adventure, daring photos, and perhaps a bit of attention. But the city had offered him something far more valuable: understanding, respect, and the joy of observing life carefully and thoughtfully. He realized that stories, memories, and lessons were far richer than any viral post or daring stunt. Adventure, he understood now, was not just about being bold. It was about learning, growing, and connecting with the world in meaningful ways. As night fell, Jake and his friends walked back toward their hotel, the streets quieter now, illuminated by the warm glow of street lamps. The city felt alive but calm, full of stories yet to be discovered. Jake felt a quiet determination to approach each new experience with mindfulness and respect, knowing that some lessons could not be captured in a photograph. They had to be felt and remembered. Before going to bed, Jake sat by the window, looking out at the city lights once again. He opened the journal he had bought and began to write, capturing the day's experiences in simple, honest words. He wrote about the river, the performers, the markets, and the sunset, but most of all, he wrote about what he had learned from the previous day at Buckingham Palace. He reflected on patience, respect, and understanding, realizing that these qualities were far more important than attention or fame. As he closed the journal and turned off the light, Jake felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known before. The city had offered him adventure in unexpected ways, not through reckless stunts, but through quiet observation, reflection, and appreciation. and he knew that the lessons he had learned today would stay with him forever, guiding him in the travels and experiences that awaited him in the days ahead. The next day, Jake awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the past 2 days had changed something inside him. No longer was he driven by the need to capture the most daring or extreme moment for his social media followers. Instead, he wanted to experience London in a way that was thoughtful, respectful, and memorable in its own quiet way. He could feel the excitement in the air, but it was tempered now with patience and awareness. After breakfast, Jake suggested to his friends that they visit the Tower of London. He had read about the rich history there, from the crown jewels to the stories of famous prisoners and kings. Unlike his usual approach, he wanted to absorb the history, understand the stories behind the walls, and really connect with the place. His friends, noticing the seriousness in his tone, agreed. They wanted a meaningful experience too, not just photos and excitement. As they approached the tower, the massive stone walls rose high, casting shadows over the cobbled streets below. Guards in traditional uniforms patrolled the grounds, their movements careful and deliberate. Jake felt a sense of respect for these men and women, a feeling he hadn't fully understood the first day at Buckingham Palace. These were not just figures in a tourist photograph. They were part of a long tradition, upholding history and security with dedication and precision. Jake and his friends joined a guided tour, led by a historian whose passion for the tower's stories was contagious. As they walked through the grounds, Jake listened carefully, absorbing every detail. He learned about the kings and queens who had lived there, the battles fought, and the stories of courage and resilience that had unfolded within the tower's walls. Each stone seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and Jake felt a connection to the countless people who had stood there long before him. At one point, the guide led them to the room where the crown jewels were displayed. The jewels sparkled under carefully arranged lights, their beauty breathtaking. But Jake noticed something more important: the security measures in place, the careful handling of each artifact, and the seriousness with which the staff treated their responsibilities. It reminded him again of the King's Guard, the lesson that some things were bigger than individual thrills or attention. Some things demanded care, patience, and respect. After the tower, Jake and his friends walked along the riverside toward London Bridge. Along the way, Jake took moments to notice the little details he had often overlooked before. The intricate designs on street lamps, the patterns in the brickwork of old buildings, the way sunlight reflected off the water. He began to photograph these moments, not for likes or fame, but as a way to remember the beauty of the city and its quiet, everyday glory. As they walked, Jake's mind wandered back to Buckingham Palace. He thought about the moment he had jumped in front of the guard, the rush of adrenaline, and the sudden presence of the officer who had appeared without warning. At the time, it had been terrifying and embarrassing. Now it felt like a turning point, a moment that had taught him humility, patience, and the importance of understanding boundaries. He realized that learning from mistakes was far more valuable than avoiding them entirely. That day had given him insight that no daring stunt ever could. While crossing a small plaza, Jake noticed a group of children watching a street magician perform. Their faces were full of wonder as the magician pulled small surprises from empty hands and made objects appear seemingly out of nowhere. Jake watched closely, fascinated by the concentration, skill, and patience required to perform even simple tricks. He realized that skill and practice, rather than recklessness, were what created amazement and respect. The magician's careful approach reminded him of the King's Guard, dedicated, disciplined, and commanding attention without unnecessary movement or showiness. By the afternoon, Jake and his friends found themselves near a quiet park. They decided to rest under the shade of a large tree, enjoying the calm atmosphere. The park was filled with people walking dogs, reading books, and enjoying the sunshine. Jake watched a small group of musicians practicing quietly nearby, their melodies weaving gently into the sounds of the park. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt during his impulsive adventures the day before. This calmness, he realized, was part of the experience he had been missing all along. As they relaxed, Jake reflected on his journey so far. He had come to London seeking excitement and memorable moments, but he had found something deeper, an understanding of respect, patience, and the quiet power of observation. He thought about the King's Guard, the officers who had appeared when he acted impulsively, and the countless people who worked behind the scenes to preserve history, culture, and order. They had shown him that true adventure didn't always mean daring acts. It could also mean learning, growing, and connecting with the world around you. After a while, they continued exploring, heading toward a local market known for handmade crafts and traditional foods. The market was lively but organized, filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, roasted coffee, and spices. Jake noticed the care and effort that each vendor put into their work. Every item had a story, a skill, and dedication behind it. He realized that admiration and attention were most meaningful when earned through respect and effort, not by impulsive or reckless actions. Jake stopped at a small stall selling hand-painted postcards and prints. The artist, a quiet and focused individual, was carefully arranging her work, ensuring each piece was displayed beautifully. Jake watched her, appreciating the dedication she put into her craft. He purchased a few prints, not just as souvenirs, but as reminders of the lesson he was learning. That respect, patience, and careful attention to detail could create lasting impressions far greater than any impulsive stunt. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the city with warm orange and pink hues, Jake and his friends found a small cafe along a quiet street. They ordered tea and pastries, sitting outside to enjoy the view. Jake reflected on the day, realizing how much he had grown in just a few short days. He thought about how his initial approach to travel had been focused on attention, thrills, and social media fame. Now it was about learning, observing, and truly appreciating the people, places, and stories he encountered. During their conversation, Jake shared his thoughts with his friends. "I think I understand now," he said softly. "Adventure isn't just about doing something bold or risky. It's about learning, appreciating, and being present in the moment. I can still explore, have fun, and experience excitement, but in a way that respects the people and places I'm visiting." His friends nodded, some smiling, others thoughtful. They had noticed the change in Jake, and they agreed that this new approach felt more meaningful, rewarding, and genuine. As evening approached, they walked along the quiet streets, taking in the lights of the city reflecting in puddles from a recent rain. Jake felt a sense of gratitude for everything he had experienced, the excitement, the mistakes, the lessons, and the discoveries. He realized that every moment, even the challenging or embarrassing ones, contributed to growth and understanding. He thought about the King's Guard, standing silently at their posts, and understood fully now that their presence represented something far larger than himself. They were symbols of tradition, discipline, and respect, qualities that he now carried with him in his own way. Before returning to the hotel, Jake decided to write a few notes in his journal. He described the Tower of London, the streets, the markets, and the quiet moments in the park. But most importantly, he wrote about what he had learned from his encounter at Buckingham Palace and the experiences that followed. Writing it down helped him process his thoughts, solidifying the lessons he had gained. He knew that these reflections would guide him in future travels and in life, reminding him to balance curiosity and adventure with patience and respect. As Jake settled into bed that night, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The city of London had given him so much more than he had expected, not just sights and experiences, but wisdom. He realized that true stories, the kind that people remembered and learned from, were not about reckless bravery or fleeting excitement. They were about growth, understanding, and meaningful engagement with the world. The memory of the King's Guard, the Tower, the street performers, and the quiet moments of reflection would stay with him forever, guiding him on the journey ahead. The next morning, Jake woke up with a quiet excitement. It wasn't the kind of excitement he had felt when he first arrived in London, eager to perform stunts and capture daring photos. This time, it was a calm, reflective excitement, the kind that comes when you feel ready to experience a place fully, without rushing or forcing anything. He had learned valuable lessons over the past few days, and he was eager to put them into practice. After breakfast, Jake suggested to his friends that they visit the British Museum. It was a place he had always wanted to see, filled with stories from every corner of the world. Unlike his first days in London, he wasn't thinking about the perfect photograph or the most exciting moment. He wanted to learn, to connect with the history, and to truly appreciate the effort, skill, and dedication of the people who had preserved these artifacts for generations. His friends smiled at his thoughtful approach, happy to follow his lead. Walking through the museum, Jake's eyes were drawn to the incredible diversity of exhibits. Ancient sculptures, intricately carved jewelry, and detailed paintings filled the halls. Every artifact told a story of a civilization, a people, or an individual who had lived centuries before. As he moved from one exhibit to the next, he began to feel a deep respect for the past. He thought about the dedication of those who had created these works, the challenges they must have faced, and the care taken by the museum staff to protect and display them. It reminded him again of the King's Guard: dedication, discipline, and respect in action, even in roles that might seem quiet or routine to outsiders. In one hall, Jake paused in front of a display of ancient coins. He marveled at the precision of each engraving, the tiny details that told stories of trade, leadership, and culture. He imagined the people who had handled these coins, their daily lives, their challenges, and their joys. For the first time in his travels, Jake felt fully connected to the lives of others across time and space. Photography and daring stunts suddenly seemed trivial compared to the richness of understanding and empathy he was gaining from observing and learning. After the museum, Jake and his friends wandered into a nearby park to rest. They sat under a large oak tree, enjoying the warm afternoon sun. Jake opened the journal he had purchased a few days earlier and began writing. He described the museum exhibits, the details he noticed, and the stories that had captured his imagination. But most importantly, he wrote about his personal growth. He reflected on the events at Buckingham Palace, the lessons he had learned from the King's Guard, and the ways he had changed over the past few days. Writing it down helped him internalize the experience, turning it into a meaningful part of his life rather than just a fleeting adventure. As he wrote, Jake noticed other visitors enjoying the park. Families played games, couples walked hand in hand, and children chased each other with laughter echoing in the air. The scene reminded him of the simple joys he had overlooked when he was focused on daring stunts. He realized that adventure didn't have to be extreme or risky. It could be found in everyday moments, in connection with people, and in observing life with curiosity and respect. Later in the afternoon, Jake and his friends visited the historic streets near Westminster. They passed by Parliament and Big Ben, and Jake marveled at the architecture and the history embedded in every stone. Instead of rushing to get the perfect shot, he took his time walking, noticing the details of the buildings, the expressions on people's faces, and the rhythm of the city around him. Each step felt deliberate, thoughtful, and connected. While crossing a small square, Jake noticed a small group of tourists attempting to imitate guards from Buckingham Palace. They were trying to pose humorously, making exaggerated gestures to get a laugh. Jake smiled inwardly, remembering his own impulsive stunt. But this time he didn't feel tempted to join in. He understood the importance of boundaries and respect. Instead, he observed quietly, appreciating the humor without becoming part of it. The lesson from the King's Guard had stayed with him, and he felt proud that he could now approach situations with patience and awareness. As evening approached, Jake and his friends decided to take a walk along the south bank, where the Thames reflected the orange glow of the sunset. Street performers filled the area with music, magic tricks, and laughter. Jake watched a musician play a gentle tune on a violin, noting the concentration and dedication required to produce such beautiful music. He felt a growing appreciation for people who worked hard, practiced diligently, and shared their skills with the world. These were real forms of adventure, acts of patience, effort, and creativity that demanded respect rather than reckless attention-seeking. Sitting on a bench along the river, Jake opened his journal again and wrote about the day. He wrote about the museum, the streets, the music, and the quiet moments in the park. He also reflected on how much he had grown since his first day at Buckingham Palace. That impulsive jump, which had seemed thrilling at the time, now felt like a turning point in his understanding of the world. It had taught him humility, patience, and the value of observing before acting. It had shown him that some things, like traditions, history, and discipline, deserved respect and careful thought. As night fell, Jake and his friends decided to return to the hotel. The city lights reflected in the Thames like a ribbon of gold, and the streets were alive with people enjoying the evening. Jake felt a sense of peace and satisfaction that went beyond excitement or thrill. He understood now that meaningful experiences were built on respect, awareness, and thoughtful engagement. Adventure wasn't about the fastest jump or the most daring stunt. It was about learning, connecting, and growing. Back at the hotel, Jake reflected on the past few days. He thought about the King's Guard, standing silently in their positions, and the lessons they had unknowingly taught him. He thought about the museum, the streets, the music, and the quiet moments of reflection that had filled his days. Each experience had contributed to his understanding of respect, patience, and meaningful exploration. He realized that these lessons were far more valuable than any photograph, video, or social media post could ever be. Jake picked up his phone and looked at the video from his jump in front of the King's Guard. It had already been shared widely online, receiving a mix of laughs, comments, and warnings. He smiled softly, recognizing how fleeting online attention could be compared to the deep and lasting lessons he had learned. He decided to post a follow-up story, not to boast or entertain, but to share the lesson honestly. He wrote about humility, respect, and the importance of understanding boundaries. He explained how the King's Guard had unknowingly taught him something valuable and how he wanted others to learn from his experience. The response was immediate. People appreciated the honesty and reflection, and many shared their own experiences of learning respect through travel. Jake felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond likes or views. He realized that meaningful storytelling came from truth, humility, and growth, not from reckless stunts or temporary attention. His experience at Buckingham Palace had transformed into a story of learning and self-improvement, one that he could carry with him for the rest of his life. Before sleeping, Jake opened his journal one last time that night. He wrote down the final reflections of his journey, the beauty of the city, the lessons of history, the music, the people, and most importantly, the lessons of patience and respect learned from the King's Guard. He felt a quiet gratitude for every experience, the thrilling, the embarrassing, and the reflective. Each had shaped him, teaching him something new about adventure, curiosity, and the importance of thinking before acting. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake felt a calm certainty. He knew that his adventures in London were far from over, but he also knew that he would approach them differently from now on. He would explore with awareness, connect with the people and culture around him, and seek experiences that enriched his understanding rather than merely seeking attention. The story of his jump in front of the King's Guard would stay with him as a reminder that respect, patience, and mindfulness were just as exciting as any daring stunt, and far more meaningful in the long run. The city of London, with all its history, energy, and stories, had given him a gift far beyond what he had expected. It had given him understanding, growth, and the wisdom to approach life with curiosity and care. And as Jake closed his eyes, he smiled, knowing that true adventure was no longer about impressing others. It was about learning, growing, and appreciating the world with respect and awareness.